Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called Doll Bloods. It's a nice piece of comedic fantasy, inspired by stuff like Terry Pratchett and Yancey Crowshaw's first novel, Mogworld. If you're looking for something new to read and feel like supporting a struggling indie, check it out. Links are in the description. China is an interesting place. It has centuries, if not millennia worth of history and mythology that has been recorded and survived to be passed down to the current day. Yet without exception, whenever anyone talks about Asian cinema and media, it's always Korea, Japan, and sometimes Thailand that people talk about, never China. But then again, it's not surprising when your film industry regularly pumps out stuff like Shanghai Fortress. Terrible, horrible movie. I regret watching it. Then again, those countries don't have the CCP running their governments. You see, the Communist Party of China has very strict guidelines on what can and can't be presented in Chinese media. And these restrictions can be so all-encompassing that they make the Soviet Union censorship policies look reasonable by comparison. The way these restrictions are written, it actually makes certain genres just outright unviable in the Chinese market. The most banal of spiritual themes aren't allowed, you can't have bad endings, no over-the-top or graphic violence, no supernatural elements unless it's traditional fantasy or local mythology, there's a certain shade of blue that's forbidden, and you can't have stories that are silly or nonsensical, and God help you if you try to overtly criticize the government. So yeah, it's not an ideal place for creativity to thrive. Consequently, this has also meant that their video game industry has been rather mute, made up mostly of knockoffs and rip-offs of other titles for the mobile market. But recently, the Chinese industry has been showing some flashes of genuine creativity and success, both in Asia and across the world. MiHoYo is a great example of this with how Genshin Impact blew up, but there's one game from the Middle Kingdom that I want to talk about. Black Myth: Wukong. Unlike Genshin Impact, this is a game I can vaguely remember hearing about ages ago, brought to us by developer Game Science. It's a loose adaptation of the classical novel Journey to the West, drawing inspiration from games like the God of War series for its gameplay, so to say that it bucked the usual trend of Chinese games would be putting it lightly. This is a pure single-player experience with no online elements, no monetization scheme, and nor is it anemic in order to fleece more money out of the player with promises of expansions. It's also a game that's balls of fun and possibly one of the best games I've played this year. Now, right off the bat, it's this game setting based on ancient mythical China that will draw you in. Artistically, it is a creative breath of fresh air. Seeing all the various Yaoguai from mythology skulking about is awesome, and of course, we do get profiles on them, letting us learn a bit of the real-life lore behind these creatures and how they came to be. We also get to explore some gorgeous levels full of both natural and man-made structures that all feel distinct. Like many an anime watcher, I'm more familiar with Japanese aesthetics, so I'm no expert on Chinese aesthetics or artistry, but even then I could still tell the difference between this ancient China compared to the locales in something like Ghost of Tsushima or Samurai Warriors. There's also these hidden meditation spots you can interact with scattered across the levels. These give you a free skill point, but before you get it, you have to sit through a brief cinematic of the Destined One meditating. I won't lie, these are nice moments of tranquility that I looked forward to, for more than one reason, and they showcase the talent of Game Science's art team. The story acts as a sequel to Journey to the West rather than a straight-up adaptation. We play as the Destined One, a potential successor to the original Monkey King, Sun Wukong, as he seeks out the lost artifacts of the Monkey King in order to truly inherit the mantle and the power associated with it. It's an enjoyable narrative, the characters are distinct and lively, and the chapters are bookended by some well-done animated cinematics that explain how the chapter's events are connected to the book. We also get a nice tapestry that lets us learn more about these events, and I'll be honest, playing this has got me interested in reading the book now. I want to read Journey to the West. Failing that, finally check out the old Monkey TV show. Which reminds me, as tempting as it is to play with the Chinese voice acting, I do recommend you play the game with the English voice acting. The English voice actors do a good job and they suit the characters, but that's not the only reason. The real reason is because thanks to the game hitching here and there, it leads to a mild case of audio desyncing, which gives the game some 70s style kung fu charm.
From the Black Wind Mountain to here, we meet again. Those rats. They tied me up on sight for no reason. Joking, they'd prepare me for their king's table.
But I must confess, I wasn't entirely clear on what was going on, and there were times where I felt like I was at a loss. But I do have two reasons for this. The first is that when I first fired up the game, it suffered from some pretty bad technical hiccups and outright crashed after beating the opening boss fight. So when I played it a second time, I rushed through the cinematics to avoid the crash. So I may have lost out on some potentially important context. The other is that I just haven't had the opportunity to put in as much time with the game as I wanted to. At the time of writing this script, I've only made it near the end of the second chapter, and I've been strapped for time. I've been splitting my attention between the game, work, other videos, writing projects, trying to work out, and also stumbling onto the game's side content. If nothing else, I can say with confidence that at least I've put more effort into Black Myth Wukong than that journo who complained about a lack of women in the game. The hack and slash, or bash and bonk if you prefer, gameplay feels nice. It's got a nice fluid feel that's easy to get to grips with, chain together light attack combos with heavy attacks that give you some extra oomph. They've also got magic spells that give you an edge, and these are inspired by the abilities of Sun Wukong from the book. You even get these Yaoguai spirits that we can equip, functioning like perks, while also letting us transform into the spirits for a special attack or ability. All of this is backed up by some light RPG progression and a stance mechanic, making the combat surprisingly deep when you really stop and take a moment to think about it. However, it should be said that the game's combat isn't a case of easy to learn, hard to master, like the combat in the Arkham series. Rather, this is more of a case of easy to learn, easy to master. Even when you encounter later enemies that start to put up a challenge, there will be times where you can just run in and just button mash away, and odds are you're very much going to come out on top, no worse for wear. Even if you ignore the skill tree progression or weapon and armor crafting, this can still be the case, robbing the game of a sense of challenge and its quieter moments, and that's without touching on the issues with the stance mechanic. Changing your stance doesn't change how combat flows, rather it changes what type of heavy attack you use. Compare this to Yakuza 0, where switching your combat stance meant swapping out one fighting style for another with different pros and cons, such as giving up speed and reach for hitting hard and a lot harder with weapons, or gain more speed and a higher critical hit chance in exchange for regular attacks doing piss poor damage. I won't deny that the different heavy attacks do provide different advantages in combat, like greater reach, or more reliably interrupting an enemy charge, or just a fiercer bonk on the head. They even have their own passive upgrade trees that can give them some kind of edge, but it just sucks that without more overt changes to the light attack at least, the player is left with no real overt reason to experiment, and for a good chunk of the time, you'll be perfectly fine just sticking with the starting bash stance for a good long while. But if there was something about the gameplay that I found to be more disappointing, it would be how Sun Wukong's transformations were translated. They just reek of wasted potential. With one exception, they just function as special attacks and the swappable perks I mentioned earlier. There was real potential here if the transformations opened up new methods of exploration and traversal, something to give the player a real reason to go back and explore earlier areas for secrets that were previously impossible to find, let alone explore or hunt for. But no, it's just special attacks and special abilities. But if nothing else, at least we get a diverse array of enemies that have been translated over successfully to bonk on the head. They're different in appearance and tactics and are inspired by different aspects of Journey to the West and broader Chinese mythology, but it's the bosses that you'll spend most of your time going up against. This may disappoint some people, but don't be fooled by what some people have said up to the game's release. Black Myth Wukong is not a Souls-like. It does take some inspiration here and there like Darksiders 3 did, but as I said earlier, this has more God of War in its DNA, and functionally, it's basically a boss rush game. There is a good chunk of challenge to be found, but don't expect to be bashing your head against a brick wall like in a good Souls-like. So this does mean that there are bosses that are piss easy. Most of them I've been able to beat on my second or third try, with a good handful on the first go. It can be disappointing when this is the case, but when you go up against one of the tougher bosses, beating them does elicit the same sense of pride and accomplishment that Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Lords of the Fallen, and other good Souls-likes do. On the technical side of things, the game does run great. I've tried it on both my PC and Steam Deck, and it ran mostly smooth and looked great on both. On my PC, as stated earlier, I did experience some hitches in the frame rate and consequently audio desyncing during the cutscenes, which led to that 70s kung fu charm. Thankfully, it was never severe enough to ruin the experience for me, outside of that first hiccup when I started it. Overall, it was like playing Elden Ring before I finished upgrading my PC for the Silent Hill 2 remake. Once I got warmed up, it was smooth sailing all the way. It being installed on an HDD was probably a bigger factor than my CPU, GPU, or any other U in my rig. The only other thing I have to say is this: I friggin' love the Headless Monk. His dialogue is a lot of fun, and the songs he sings, oh man, is it fun to watch him sing as he struts around in the cutscenes, just doing his thing. Like, he's a real toe tapper, he is. Here, I'll let the enlightened bastard speak for himself. Overall, I'm glad I checked out Black Myth Wukong. It's been a breath of fresh air in the modern AAA market, and it's great to see that this may be the start of a new series. One that we unfortunately know the CCP will eventually co-op, but for now, it's a thing of real creative beauty that I can wholeheartedly recommend. I look forward to the new expansion that's been announced, and game science as a dev that I am going to be keeping an eye on with keen interest. I can't wait to see what their next game is like. Alright, thanks for checking out this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'd really appreciate it if you also hit the like and subscribe buttons. That'd be wonderful. Now for the next game, I'm going to be taking a look at the Silent Hill 2 remake. I've been looking forward to that for a good long while, and I've got some good reasons to be cautiously optimistic. I've also got some movie reviews in the pipeline for films like 8mm, and I might also have one for Transformers 1 lined up as well. I've also got a new book out. It's a cookbook focusing on cheesecake. I put the links in the description. Feel free to check it out. I've got all that and more coming up, so please stick around.